So why did Jesus heal the poor invalid at the pool of Bethesda, right outside Jerusalem? He is demonstrating once again his deity. He's showing the people in Jerusalem that he is God. What a big statement that is. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope this message will be helpful.
15. Now, understanding that, first of all, I want us to understand that the Gospel of John is not in chronological order. Okay? Luke is the most chronological book in the New Testament, written by Dr. Luke, who is very meticulous, everything right in order. So this book is written to prove one thing. The whole book written for one purpose: to prove definitively that Jesus is God. That's what's written. And all the miracles that we see in the Gospel of John, including the 7 I Ams we've talked about before, and the miracles demonstrate that. So when it says sometimes later, we don't have a clue what that means. It just means after a little while, for whatever reason. Prior to this miracle, we know that Jesus turned the water into wine, and he healed the rich person's sick child. Now we come to this miracle. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. He went up to Jerusalem also sounds a little strange too, because what he's doing here, he's talking about topography. Jerusalem was up as opposed to being in a valley. For a feast of the Jews, once again, perhaps Passover. Speculation is it's Passover. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. One who was there had been there an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he said, "Do you want to get well?" That question says a lot. Okay, do you really want to get well? Jesus is saying also, I did not come for the well. I came as a physician for the sick. Do you want to get well? "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred." Again, I apologize for commentary here, but here's the point of the water being stirred. There was a mythology back in the day, it might have been true, that once a year the angels stirred the water, and if you got there in time before the water quit being stirred and got into the water, you'd be healed. Let me offer this as a sidebar. We'll get through this in a minute. All healing does not come from God. All miracles don't come from God. Somehow we believe that. All you have to do is go back to the magicians in Pharaoh's day and see that they really did some miracles as well. Okay? While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, Is the Sabbath law forbids you to carry your mat?" He replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" He does not only demonstrate that he doesn't have faith, he blames Jesus for his predicament now. You follow me? Nowhere in this passage does it say this man had faith. Okay? Pick up your mat and walk. He blamed Jesus for that. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. "Unless you people see this miracle, you'll not do it. You'll not believe." The royal official said, "Sir, come down before the child dies." That's the last miracle we talked about. He doesn't believe. This guy doesn't believe. And it's important to realize that not every good thing comes from God. Yeah, God permits it, right? But this guy doesn't believe. How do you make sense of that? We often think of faith as being the key that unlocks the door, right? I've heard that analogy. This guy demonstrates he doesn't have faith at all. And as a matter of fact, he ends up going to the temple and dragging his mat along, and they accuse him of breaking the Sabbath because he's carrying his mat. Now, once again, the Pharisees did what I'm told is they built a fence around the law. Okay? What does that mean? In order to protect people from the law, so to speak, they created their own law, which was much more harsh than the law of God. They had all these things they added to the law as a preventive for people getting too close to the law. Okay? For instance, one of the tenets of the law was if you touched a dead body, you had to go make a sacrifice at the tabernacle or at the temple. So what the Pharisees did is they said, if you're walking on a pathway, on a dirt path, and you happen to step on an ant, you're unclean. So you have to go make a sacrifice. And they're very gifted at that because, again, not unlike the NBA, the rigged game was in. We've all read about this week, I'm sure. The rigging was that the Pharisees and the scribes and the chief priests controlled the market for sacrifices being offered in the temple. And unless you were a rural person, you didn't have access to the animals that they wanted to sacrifice. So if you were called unclean, you had to go to them and buy an animal. So first of all, first lesson I have for this is Jesus is always on time. This poor guy sat there for 38 years. 38 years. And of course, when Jesus asked him, do you want to get well? He's asking a serious question. Now again, the mythology aside, we don't know that the angel stirring the water even occurred. We don't know much about this miracle at all, except that this pool had some healing powers, and Jesus used those healing powers, if you will. But even in this case, he didn't use them. Healing does not always demand faith to be healed. With all due respect to our current religious television preachers, I wish Carol Bottoms was here today because he'd be going, say more. He'd be egging me on in this area. But all due respect to TV preachers, your faith is not required for healing. Now, there are places where Jesus affirms them for believing and saying your faith has made you whole. So there's a little conflict in the passages here. However, no contradiction. It's important to realize that faith is a very big part of our journey. But the point of faith is the object of our faith, not our own faith. Who am I trusting? We can make ourselves believe whatever we want to believe. It's been proven time and time again. People are very gullible, and we will believe almost anything if we're pushed hard enough. Most people will. Sometime later, Jesus went to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. He's near this pool, Sheep Gate Pool, Bethesda, surrounded by 5 colonnades. Here, a great number of disabled people came to lie. The blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Now, interesting enough here, John the Baptist at this point is probably still alive. And Jesus is referring to the passage in Isaiah which says he came to set the prisoner free, to heal the lame, to heal the blind, and so forth. This is a reference that Jesus has, reference point for him. But guess what he doesn't say in this same passage? He doesn't say, raise the dead. It's important to understand that John the Baptist is not going to be healed, except in eternity. And John the Baptist probably got word of this because we know later, at some point, John the Baptist questions whether or not Jesus is really the Messiah or not. That's a strange question, is it not? for John the Baptist to do that? Now, I don't think it's strange at all. He's under duress. He's been tortured by Herod's folks. He's getting ready to be beheaded. He's probably feeling pretty desperate and pretty lonely at this point in his journey. And I think certain amounts of doubts are normal for people to have. I can't tell you how many times I've talked with people who are dying, who are fearful. And I've said many, many times, why wouldn't you be afraid? You've not done this before. You follow me? Being afraid or fearful of death for a believer is not a sin. If that's overwhelming, it's not a good thing at all. But to have a certain amount of anxiety about dying is perfectly normal. And John the Baptist had that. The point is, Jesus is always on time. Now, the problem we have is our problem, not his. Because sometimes we think Jesus should show up and do whatever we want him to on our timetable. Is that true? I'm guilty of that. The next point is, the second part, the main point of this whole passage is, Jesus is demonstrating his authority over disease. Who else can do this but the Messiah? He's demonstrating for all to see that he has come from God. He says, pick up your mat and walk. Now, there's another story also where Jesus says, pick up your mat and walk. Where is that one? It's the story of the lame boy that the disciples take and put him on the roof of a house, and they open up the roof and they lower him down at Jesus' feet, and Jesus does what? What does Jesus do? He immediately says, your sins are forgiven, and the crowd goes crazy. Who can forgive sin but God? And then what does he do? He says, take up your mat and walk. So he's demonstrating his authority not only to heal that little person who was let down through the roof, he's demonstrating his authority over sin and forgiveness. Who can do that but God? The skeptics answer the question in that story. Well, my next point here is, he heals the invalid who does not have faith. And at once the man is cured. At once the man is cured. Now, again, as I extrapolate this out into our current world, plenty of people get sick and pray and they don't die. Is that true? Does that immediately mean they're believers? No. Praying for, why would you, if you find out you've got that verdict, why would you not pray? Again, the point here is that Jesus heals this invalid, and he has zero faith at this point. Pick up your mat and walk. And guess what else Jesus is doing here? I think this whole passage is just, to me, is fascinating. He does it on what day of the week? Sabbath. The Sabbath. May God forbid that you work on the Sabbath, is the response that the Pharisees have, because they guard that Sabbath religiously. And now let me offer this. I've heard it said by people that the one command that Jesus violated was the Sabbath command. That is not true. He didn't violate it at all. He violated the traditions attached to the Sabbath. And he did that on a fairly regular basis. Why did Jesus do that?
Because he said it was much easier to forgive somebody.
You do good on the Sabbath, right? Mm-hmm. I think Jesus does it for this reason. I don't mean to be sacrilegious. I really think that Jesus did it for this reason. Or perhaps this reason. I'm serious. He wants them to know that how dare they enforce Sabbath rules that are not rules at all. My next point here is this. He has authority over the Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, is it the Sabbath? The law forbids you to carry your mat. The law does not forbid him to carry his mat. They're accusing this poor guy who has been healed. Now, here's another part of this story I think is really interesting. You've seen this, Ellen, in your career. How long does somebody 55, 60 years old have to be in a hospital bed before they lose the strength to walk across the room? Not real long. This guy hadn't walked in 38 years. So think about this. Not only is he healed, his legs are then strengthened to the point they can walk into the synagogue and on the Sabbath and the temple. And they're going to accuse him. I mean, I would think in a normal culture, let me just say this. If I had a friend or someone I knew who had been sick unto death or an invalid for 38 years, and they walked through those back doors of the church, I would hope we would stand up and clap. Holy cow, what a miracle. What they're focused in on what? They're focused in on Jesus violating the Sabbath. Really, this guy violating the Sabbath, and Jesus violated it too, according to them. We'll get to another one in a week or so. You remember the story where Jesus restores the sight of the blind man? He takes some spittle, right? And he puts some handful of dirt and puts it in the guy's eyes. You know why they say that violated the law? Because they had laws about brick masons. A brick mason couldn't work on the Sabbath. Mixing mud and spittle was mixing for bricklaying purposes. Wow. He has authority over the Sabbath. But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" Again, he's not demonstrating an ounce of faith at all. As a matter of fact, he's really cursing the guy who healed him. So they asked him, "Who is this fellow you told us to pick up your mat and walk?" The man said, who was healed him, had no idea who it is. For Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Why does Jesus slip away? Again, Jesus does not want to be known as a magician. He does not want to be known as a miracle worker yet in Jerusalem. His time has not come. So what does he do? He starts a TV show and brags about his miracle working ability. No, he slips out quietly. He didn't want any notoriety at all. Wow. My fifth point here is this. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again." You're well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. This is evidence the guy has not been converted. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. He finally connects the dots and then does give Jesus the credit for the miracle. And I think what he's saying here is this, as I parse this out in my brain: to whom much is given, much is expected. Think about the miracles that Jesus did. I remember this so vividly when I think about this passage, where Jesus stands over on the mountaintop and looks down at Jerusalem and says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, had the miracles that had been done here, had they been done in Sodom and Gomorrah would have repented in sackcloth and ashes." Think about the culpability of that statement. Think about the culpability of that statement. Think about our culpability. Because we have the evidence that is far beyond our imagination of the reaction and the reality of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that resurrection should impact every aspect of our lives. Six, it demonstrates Jesus is who he claimed to be. Because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him. Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at work on this very day." Holy cow, think about that statement. Jesus doesn't knuckle under and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He says, "Wait a minute. My Father is always at work. And then, of course, they begin to connect the dots. I too am working. For this reason, they tried all the harder to kill him. Why? Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Wow. You see, it's important to realize that God has called you and I to live lives of resurrection, to live lives of submission to the truth of God. And sometimes I think we go through the motions. I go through the motions. I find myself getting that rhythm going on, and I just keep I quit thinking about things that are important. Such as, it's interesting to me that sometimes I think, this is just John, so don't take this as a shot at anybody. Sometimes I think we go through the motions and we forget the purpose. You see, we are here called by God to be making disciples of Jesus Christ.
Thank you for tuning in today. I hope this message has been helpful. Jesus is still in the miracle working business. We know that. If this message has been helpful, feel free to give us a call at 252-237-4616. We'll be glad to talk with you about this or anything else related to your spiritual journey. God bless you and have a great week.